Everyone for coming, and I appreciate your patience today. We had a few little technical difficulties, as we always do. This is the first Tuesday in January 2016. I appreciate everyone being here today, and if you're viewing from home, I appreciate you being here and watching. I think we're going to have a very good program today. I want to fill you in on some of the things that are coming up. In February 2nd, Betsy Thorpe is going to be back. She's going to be talking about the train wreck at Dutchman's Curve once again. You remember that that's the worst train wreck in U.S. history, and Nashville still holds the title, you know. So we got that. March 1st, Debbie Watts is going to come, and her presentation is Taking History to the Stage. You may remember Debbie Watts came and she did a thing on the Ryman Diaries. It was sort of a musical, and Captain Tom Ryman came. And that's kind of taken off. She's got a lot of mileage out of that. So she's going to come back and talk about that, how you actually bring history to the stage, how do you make it interesting for people. And that's one thing I'm very passionate about is how you bring history out there and make the average person interested in it. So that's through March 1st. I haven't really got any others yet. Two things I did want to tell you about. In May, the Archives is probably going to do, well, we will do some kind of exhibit on the Nashville Police Department. We have a lot of police records, we have some artifacts, and so we're going to do that. We're going to invite the police to come, so there'll be that. In August, we'll have, in August the lawyers will come. So we'll have August, the legal community, some of our lawyers will come, and you know, we've got a lot of court books, we've got minutes, we've got all sorts of things that relate to the court. And so those two things together I wanted to kind of highlight over the next coming year. Without much more delay, I wanted to introduce Reice Ann Towns. She has recently completed a book, 40 Feet and Rising, Nashville's Historic Floods, 1793 to 2010. And let me read you a little bio on her. Reice Ann Towns has enjoyed research and writing since she was in elementary school. She earned a bachelor's degree in English from Middle Tennessee State University and a master's degree in elementary education from Trevecca Nazarene University. In her free time, Mrs. Towns enjoys reading, photography, and being with friends. She lives in Nashville, and this is her first book. So I appreciate everyone being here today. She will be available later for signings. If you'd like to pick up a book and have her sign it, she will certainly do that. And without much else, I'll turn it over to Reice Ann.
Okay. I did a book on Nashville's floods, and I have some pictures that I'd like to share for starters. These are from my personal collection. A lot of these are in the book, and a lot of them are not because of copyright reasons. Okay, so I thought I would start off with sort of just a brief history of the Cumberland River. It was originally named Warioto by the Shawnee Indians, who were one of the first residents here. And the Cumberland travels almost 700 miles, 300 of which are in Tennessee. Its headwaters are in Lecter County, Kentucky, and it flows through Smithland on the Ohio River, which is the mouth. And there are 7 major river systems which rise in Tennessee, and these are the ones that empty into the Cumberland. I thought this was really interesting. One of the sources that I used said that there were 97 floods between 1793 and 1934. I had no idea there were that many. And 15 of these were crested at 50 feet or above, and 19 of them were in the 19th century. Aren't we glad we weren't around 1865? I was looking at those going, wow. Okay, and our rainy season is December through April, which of course corresponds with a lot of those. And then our second worst year was in 1850. And I thought this was really interesting. I included more of the article in the book, but this was just something that I found from the Daily Union in 1849. And I was looking at it thinking, I wonder if maybe they thought of something back then that we haven't figured out yet. So then for more dams that, or floods rather, that had occurred but before dams were built, these were some of the ones that preceded Old Hickory Dam. And there was also, I think, the flood of 1928, which I did not include in the book. And a lot of the same areas and streets, like downtown East Nashville, the Bellevue area, they all, of course, got flooded. And the pattern kept repeating themselves in the future floods as well. And these floods also occurred during a rainy season as well. And I thought it was really interesting that in 1937 that we had one flood that was at the beginning of the month. I think it was like around January 1st through 4th. And then near the end of the month, we had one around the 22nd or 23rd of January. And that one affected more than just the Cumberland River. And President Roosevelt had mentioned about the Red Cross helping out, and he had made the comment that he would not allow the federal government to interfere with their recovery efforts. President Roosevelt established the TVA in 1933, although there had been some talk about it, I think, prior to that. And those were the 2 primary reasons for founding the TVA. And first responsibilities in operating dams. And Old Hickory Dam, I didn't put this up here, but it actually was built in 1952, but wasn't actually open until 1954. And it was built primarily for power production, which is interesting because President Roosevelt the electric power production was actually his secondary reason and not primary reason. And I also included the flood of 75, which was the first major flood since Old Hickory Dam was built, and it occurred right around the middle part of March. And again, a lot of the same areas that were underwater before, downtown East Nashville, Shelby Park, of course, they were underwater again as well. And after the flood, a lot of developers, like down in the Englewood area, and I think out in Bellevue, and some of the other areas, bought some open land that was once privately owned, and they started building like residential subdivisions and businesses and that kind of thing. And of course, you know, the innocent people that didn't know that it was in a floodplain, of course, bought these, and unfortunately, then they were the ones that saw the result of it in 2010. And I thought this was kind of interesting from Herman Wibben. And I was reading that going, you know, we had some pretty smart people back then, but unfortunately our government didn't exactly pay any attention. And even though the primary focus on the book is the Cumberland, I know there were a lot of people on the Harpeth, especially out in Bellevue, that were affected by the flood, so I wanted to go ahead and, of course, include that in the book as well. And I didn't realize that it actually went through 5 different counties. So, and then the average water depth for it is about half of the Cumberland. And just sort of a brief recap here on the 2010 flood. 13 inches of rain, flood affected all areas, wealthy, poor. It's just unfortunate that it seemed like the Bordeaux and the people in the lower economic, that they seemed to be the ones that got help after everybody else did. And a lot of the residential and commercial developments that the developers were so eager to build after the 1975 flood, of course, that contributed to the widespread flooding as well. Dan Thomas at Channel 4 was very helpful, and I had actually asked him specifically what caused our 2010 flood, and this actually was in an email that he had sent me. And as far as could this happen again, my argument on this one is yes. When you look at these, I don't think any of them occurred 1,000 years apart. And then, you know, just again, a lot of the same repeating patterns from the previous ones. Although communication has improved and some of the changes have been made, some of the ones that I had actually listed is that Metro had their buyout program, and you know, they bought out a lot of the people that were affected, and then they turned that into green space where no one could develop on it again. And then the Corps of Engineers and the Weather Service, they're beginning to communicate a little bit better as well, which of course they didn't do during the flood. And then there's also stricter laws, or at least they're excuse me, supposed to be regarding future development in floodplains, as far as like developers supposed to be building them like 4 feet, I think, above flood stage, and just sort of some other things that, to where hopefully, you know, when they build it, then people won't be as affected before. And I self-published this through Author House, and unfortunately they're pretty much leaving the promoting and marketing up to me. So I just went ahead and listed on here how people could order a copy if they choose to do so, and also the price points. And that's all that I have, and open it up to questions.
Reice Ann, did they, I noticed before it was a 100-year plan, and then suddenly the city pushed it out to a 1,000-year plan. I thought that was kind of interesting. And the other thing, have you been able to substantiate, I've heard rumors that Opryland cut out part of its levee over there to allow the General Jackson to dock. And so that was part of their flood problem. I don't know, I've just heard rumors. You run across anything like that in your research?
No, I think they said that they built a levee around the Opryland Hotel, but I think they said that Opry Mills had different owners and that the levee was not built to protect the Opry Mills area.
With your background, how did you get interested in this?
In the flood?
Well, as far as from what they read about it, from what was read about your background, how did you get into being interested in flooding?
Well, actually, I was, of course, one of the people. I worked over in Metro Center at the time, and of course, Metro had it blocked off, I guess, because of the levee and that sort of thing. So I had 3 days off from work, and so I went around and took a bunch of pictures in various areas of town, and I was showing them to my coworkers, and they told me that I should write a book. And of course, you know, I'm looking at them like they totally lost their heads, and when they said no, they were serious, I started checking into it, and then when I saw just how much there was, I thought, okay, I could probably do this. I mean, I love research and writing, and then when I got into it, it's like, wow, this is really interesting.
Of course, being in Bellevue and everything, our history group was at the time just 4 years old. It's 10 years now. We meet every Friday. And because we had a list of that went out to about 700 people, Mayor Dean had us down at his office 6:30 every morning the next 2 weeks, and then at 5:30 we would be out in Bellevue at the middle school or the community center giving what the update from the day was. But you might want to also check, if she'd be willing to do it, Vanessa Lutton at Bellevue Middle School asked all the kids that fall to write about their flood experiences. And there's 125 articles. Now she gave those to me, but I turned around and gave them back to Jenny Tiger, who's a 5th grade teacher there now. And she still has those. And you might want to get involved with publishing them, but you can't use the names that the kids would. But I think it was interesting, one kid said, I live in River Plantation, we lost everything, my best friend lost everything, but it wasn't all bad because we didn't have school for 4 days.
And even though I didn't actually put it in the PowerPoint, I did interview several people from various areas of town, and I did actually include their personal stories in here as well. I was hoping to get somebody from all the areas of town, but unfortunately I was not able to find anyone in Bordeaux or in Antioch.
We got about 35, 40 every week in our history group, and we had 13 people who lost or were affected by it. And one of the persons that we work with can restore photos that were water damaged. And I can give you his name if anybody needed it. But it was also quite interesting, the one story that from a person in our group that was, well, one of them is the one who lost Formosus. They lost their family on that bridge. But what's interesting also, is one lady lived in Section 2 of River Plantation, and it was, water was rising, and the fire truck, the firemen, they said, there's somebody down there, I think that's elderly. So this lady is 92 years old. This fireman goes down, dragging a surfboard, kicks in her door. She's on the 2nd floor, last step, and of course it's all flooded and everything. And he says, ma'am, jump on this surfboard. She says, I'm 92 years old. How am I going to get on? He said, well, if you want to get out alive, you better jump on this surfboard. So she gets all the way out to Walgreens there at the corner of 70 and Sawyer Brown, and she looks at him and says, you're cute, are you married? So that's the funniest story we had for them.
Yes.
What effect, I never did get straight, what effect the dams, the release of the dams or the dam had on the water level? Did they really release water during this flood? Because they panicked? I guess the guy that was in charge was, had left for the day because he didn't think it was that big a deal.
Yeah, I think
vacation or there was a controversy about that.
Yeah, I think, well, again, with them not really communicating, the Corps of Engineers and the Weather Service, I don't think they opened the floodgates until like 11 o'clock Sunday night.
And so was that part of did that affect Opryland or the Harpeth? Is that how?
Definitely affected downtown Nashville.
Yeah.
I think it affected it, but it wasn't, it's hard to prove. when you got one government group going against another government group. But the Harpeth I thought was a lot attributed to Fieldstone Farms, because it's the paving of America, and you're channeling this water that used to just disperse out over all these fields. But when you start channeling that water, like they did up there in Franklin, Bellevue's downstream, and just like you see in Los Angeles when it's dry and then these things fill up, it floods.
Well, I live in Hendersonville, and during that weekend, my husband and I went over to where the dam is. And there were a lot of people who went over there just to see it. It was quite impressive. But there was a woman there from the Corps of Engineers, and we asked her, why didn't they stop the dam? And she just said the decision was made not to because all of Hendersonville would have been underwater. And we were saying, yeah, but all of Nashville's getting underwater. And it was just, she said that was the decision that was made.
I think you're right. I think it was a choice. I mean, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. But
Right.
but
I think Henderson,
you want a flood A or flood B?
I think her point was that Hendersonville would have been deeper underwater than Nashville.
I think you're right.
Yeah, where did they come up with those terms, 500-year flood and 1,000-year flood? Where did that come from?
The TVA calculates that.
Oh, okay.
And my brother just recently retired from the director of flood control. He retired during the flood. But the flood control group at TVA comes up with that. And an interesting point is everybody that bought in River Plantation was told it was a 200-year level. And every city, location, whatever, in the entire state of Tennessee, with over 25,000 people, can only have construction in a 200-year plain, except Bellevue and some parts of Nashville, which have been allowed 100 through developers.
Well, and what's interesting too is you can go down to the planning commission and you can pull your area for when they do the planning commission. You can pull the plots of land and see that there's exactly where the flood waters run. The other thing that affects that is the stormwater runoff planning.
Exactly.
And if that's screwed up, that adds to the water coming into property that is not next to a river. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, pardon the pun.
Right.
There's no way to, although those maps are so accurate that where my place is, because I'm up in the center and there's a hill, so I'm up on the hill, but the people they built the units for down below were next to the stormwater runoff, and the map showed exactly where it would flood if it was over flood level. And it comes right up to the back of my hill, my backyard, so right between the two units in front of me. So I was in I think they call it an X zone, so I can get flood insurance. So it's an interesting conundrum. I think it all has to do with the fact that we're also in a valley.
And I think I read somewhere too, like with the one of 75, that the floodplain maps had not been updated in 9 years or something along that line.
This isn't really a question, it's a comment, but it's interesting that for a long time, for decades, people knew not to build in certain areas, like around the Cumberland River, places where like the old, behind what was the old Donaldson Hospital, which is where Target and that is now. Everyone knew that they weren't supposed to build there.
Absolutely.
Including like by the Cumberland River, you had the MTA that was on Peabody Street, and I guess someone had a good deal. I don't know what the thing was. They needed to expand, and they built in a land that previously no one had ever built in because everyone knew that was a floodplain. And as a result of relocating there, we lost like 2/3, I think, a good lot of our bus fleet.
Oh, wow.
Being used in order to get enough buses. We borrowed I think that there were a lot of surplus buses from Cincinnati, and we had Cincinnati buses serve as MTA buses for over a year until they could get some. And then, of course, since then they've relocated out to the old the truck plant, Peterbilt truck plant, I think is where they're located now. So they wouldn't have that again. But we lost just about all our buses in that flood, and yet it's strange. A lot of this has been because people, for some reason, people have been allowed to build in places that in the past they went, no, a little flood, we build there. So maybe we're learning something out of this.
The soccer field on Coley Davis was owned by H.G. Hill, I think, and that whole area, that's why he donated it to the soccer field, was because it would be a runover.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's down where I am. When you say individual people, I think we're getting out of the era of individual housing. We're getting into this density issue that's going to cause a lot of problems. They were talking about over behind West Haven, what's it called? Anyway, there's a consortium that wants to build, or the consortium wants to stop the building up behind on the hill. And one, because of the, they have to blow up, basically, the land, and they're afraid of mudslides and just plain rocks coming down on the houses that are down below, which makes sense. But they're having a tough time convincing people that, you don't need 800 houses up there.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes you, I guess it gives you faith that we do have as individuals the right to protest some of this stuff and to make the people that are in control listen. But it takes a lot of heated, it's a quandrum between getting bigger and getting denser and doing this right so that we don't have these kind of calamities. That we plan for these calamities, but...
Well, where you were talking about over there at Coles and Target and that area, that was a golf driving range. Because I used to hit balls there, and that's no big deal if a golf driving range floods. But then you put in Coles and Target and
all that concrete in there.
And all that kind of,
Yeah.
and they all flooded.
Mm-hmm.
If I was their insurance company, I sure wouldn't want to pay them.
That's what's interesting. If we have, if we want flood insurance to kind of, we think that that's going to, we need to blame somebody. So if we have flood insurance, at least we can. But it makes me think too that because that's federally funded, that somebody in the federal government, some smarter, people are overseeing this and saying, wait a minute, you guys, at least say it to the community or the state, this is not a smart way to go. You got to rethink this.
But see, Nashville has a problem that its metro is all one. So there's no room really for expansion. So if Metro wants new space for new properties,
Right.
you go to the open spaces of previous, which were Bellevue and these other areas, and you just end up with this density. And I don't know, I don't think there's anybody that I've seen has a solution or even a start of a solution. It's just the times we're in.
Well, I want to thank Reice Ann for being here today. And thank you for presenting and bringing your book. It was fascinating. The floods here are pretty interesting. One thing that we have is the meteorological record, the flood stages, what the weather was every day from about 1890 through about 1930 or so. And they're marvelous, they're beautiful, they're handwritten, and they're quite fantastic. So anyway, we appreciate you being here today. Remember, next one is coming up in February, and we hope we can see you there. Have a good afternoon.